you have some, you have an argument going on within these countries about whether these were hardened criminal drug runners or innocent fishermen or some combination of both. And to a point where you have, local law enforcement making one assertion, family members making another. So this work is being done by international news media. It's just not getting a whole lot of attention here in the US, I think primarily because how much of it is so unsettled.
What do you mean by unsettled?
Like there are disagreements, in these countries about the backgrounds of some of the individuals on these boats. Some argue that they are criminal drug
Sons of
dealers.
bitches.
Some argue that they are more
They
innocent
took my hand down.
fishermen. And we'll just remind everyone to put themselves on mute if they can, except when they're asking questions. So anyway, so Robert, journalists in those countries are doing investigative work, but I think because of the lack of clarity on what they're finding, it's not receiving as much US media attention.
Thank you.
Carol, I did see your hand up go before it went down, so go ahead with your question.
Thanks. So Eric Swalwell threw his hat into the California governor race, and I'm not sure that he can overcome his history with Fang Fang, and just wondered what you thought.
All right, so Eric Swalwell, member of the House of Representatives from the Bay Area, announced last week that he's running for governor. There are now 9, by my count, relatively plausible candidates seeking that office. Swalwell, as Carol mentioned, does have a scandal or controversy, depending on your definition, in his past. At one point, he employed a young woman in his office who was an agent of the Chinese government. He maintains, and there's no way for me to know one way or another the accuracy of it, but he maintains that as soon as he found out about her identity, he immediately dismissed her and worked in close concert with US intelligence agencies. Let's assume for the sake of argument that that is an accurate portrayal of what happened. It still wouldn't prevent one of his opponents from making an allegation along these lines over the course of the campaign. I think that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. And the reason for that, Carol, in my opinion, is in a race of 9 people where there's not a prohibitive candidate, it's less likely that you see attacks on anyone other than the frontrunner.
Kash Patel already did it.
Well, I think Kash Patel, as near as I can tell, is not running for governor. And so there'll always be critics of all of the candidates on the news, on digital media, and so on. The question is not whether there's somebody, even the FBI director, who raises this, but whether it becomes a sustained issue in the campaign or not. And I think my belief is that if Swalwell were to become a strong frontrunner, you might see the other Democrats engage on this issue. As long as the field is as murky as it is now, I think it is pretty unlikely. To me, Swalwell's bigger challenge is he came to prominence as a very vocal Trump critic, and he developed a great deal of name identification and support by being a frequently appearing on cable television, criticizing Trump in any number of ways very harshly. So that's enough to get you cable visibility. But in a campaign in which there are 8 other members of your party running, he's not going to be the only candidate criticizing Donald Trump. So the challenge for Swalwell going forward is, what is his second act? We know that he and most of the other candidates don't like Trump. That's well and good. His test will be what he talks about more broadly and see if any of that is able to set him apart from the audience or not. But unless he develops a big lead, I don't see the issue you raise becoming a definitive one.
Okay, let's go to Roger.
Hey, Dan, I had a bunch of questions, but I'm going to get it down to this one, a very simple one. Do these press conferences with Carolyn Levitt and others, do they actually add anything to the discussion, any value?
Well, years ago, um, when in the early months of Bill Clinton's presidency, his office decided to begin televising all of the daily press briefings. Up until then, most press briefings were done off camera. And there were studies done in that previous era that showed that when the briefings are off camera, the average question of the press secretary or the president was between 15 and 20 words long. And 80% of the time, the question related to the question before it. Once the briefing started being televised, the average question ended up being between 50 and 60 words long. And only 20% of the time did it relate to the question asked before it. So I don't believe that these briefings are nearly as valuable as they used to be, but there's plenty of fault to go along on that. I do believe that the Trump White House, both now and in his first term, are particularly confrontational with the press. And so that lessens the value of it. But I think more than anything, the fact that both the president or the spokesperson and the reporters are on camera has robbed the dynamic of its original value that took place from when Eisenhower's press secretary Jim Hagerty inaugurated the concept back in the 1950s through the 1990s. And Mike McCurry, who was Bill Clinton's second press secretary and judged to be one of the most effective individuals ever to hold that office, he says he regrets greatly us moving to televising those briefings because they lose so much news value. That said, the Trump administration is particularly confrontational in this regard, which lessens the value even further. But I think they still have some value because it gives us some sense of what the administration's goals are. And I would say this under Trump or Biden or any other president, that when you have an individual, preferably the principal, him or herself, but if not one of the representatives answering questions, you get a sense of what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And I think there is some value on that, even if you're not getting the kind of straight answers that you're right, we deserve and we're too often not getting. Really interesting question.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay, I'm gonna pick one in the chat. Someone asked, how long will Mike Johnson be able to hang on as Speaker?
Boy, no one knows the answer to that, least of all me. But it's very clear that the House of Representatives, while it has never operated smoothly under his leadership, has become increasingly chaotic just in the last few weeks. And the number of discharge petitions, the difficulty that he's had in getting votes through, even on a straight party line basis, the very, very vocal criticism, not from just Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nancy Grace, but a growing number of his own House members. Seems to me that, like Chuck Schumer, Mike Johnson's biggest saving grace might be that even though most people don't like him in the job, nobody else wants the job. So it is entirely possible that he hangs on until a year from January, just because no other Republican House member thinks that it's something they want. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if after the first of the year, you saw a move against him. The challenge is anyone who's held in sufficiently high regard within the caucus, for example, someone like Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio, he has to ask himself a hard question is, can I succeed at that job? And if I can't succeed at the job, why would I take it on? So if Johnson survives, it's lack of alternatives, not enhanced strength.
Okay, we have a lot of hands. Let's go with Mr. Tim Jones.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, it's good to see you again, buddy.
Likewise.
Happy holidays to you, and thanks for the gift that you keep giving each month on Thursdays. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I'll make this one short. There's so many that I have, but this is an easy one. What is your view on the exit of Marjorie Taylor Greene? Do you think that it's going to have any effect? From the perspective that I would say the majority of us have it, that we have, would you say that that would be a good thing or a bad thing?
Boy, I'm so glad you asked the question because this was something that I'd wanted to cover during the webinar itself, and we just ran short on time. I think what Marjorie Taylor Greene has done is she has identified a very deep divide between Donald Trump and his up until now very loyal base on issues like inflation, on issues like healthcare, on issues like tariffs, on issues like Venezuela. I think most of them mostly are merging on issues relating to artificial intelligence, on issues, of course, relating to Jeffrey Epstein and his files. On each of these issues, MAGA Nation is somewhat uncomfortable with where Donald Trump is going. And what Marjorie Taylor Greene has decided is Donald Trump's not going to be president forever. I want a future after him. And so she is the first prominent Republican who had been a strong supporter of his to choose MAGA Nation over Trump. And I think that's a fascinating decision and actually probably a very smart one, because even Donald Trump becomes a lame duck at some point. Now, is that a good thing for the loyal opposition? I think so, but indirectly, in that a divided party is a party that's a weakened party. And if the divides between Trump and his loyal base do continue to deepen, and that's more likely to happen if other people follow Marjorie Taylor Greene's lead and separate from him. Like I said, a divided party is a weakened party. And we've talked plenty of times in the past about the divisions in the Democratic Party. Trump, for all his faults, over the course of the past 10 years, has done a pretty good job of keeping the Republican Party unified. If those divisions are starting to show, that makes them a less formidable force heading into midterms with a less motivated base, and perhaps less so in 2028 also. Really interesting.
And that's where we insert the knife and the wedge. Thanks. We agree 100%. Thanks again.
I don't give strategy, but I'll let you take it where you like.
All right.
Hey, Natalie, I'm going
Mr.
to inject
Yeah.
because I see that Ella has her hand up, and I think given all the work she did, she deserves to ask.
Okay, go ahead, Ella.
Hi. I would love to hear more about why certain demographics are now swing voters in the upcoming midterms. I know we discussed this a little bit in our preparation for the webinar, and you had mentioned married, middle-aged women, and also young male voters of all ethnic backgrounds. And I was curious as to why those specific people were now swing voters.
So, for the record, I think married female voters more broadly, not just of a particular age group, tend to be swing voters. I would exempt from that the youngest female voters, but for the most part, married women. You and I talked about this a little bit. Married female voters are a fascinating subset of the electorate because for 40 years, between 1980 and 2020, female voters tended to vote overwhelmingly Democratic. Male voters tended to vote equally overwhelmingly Republican, and that became what was known as the gender gap. And in 2024, that gender gap largely disappeared, except among Gen Z. And that is a longer conversation, should any of you care to have it. But while the gender gap is a very well-known phenomenon in American politics, what's also just as pronounced is what's known as the marriage gap. All other things considered equal, is married voters are much more likely to vote Republican. Single voters are much more likely to vote Democrat. So if you think about it, if we grotesquely oversimplify the electorate into four groups, married men, married women, single men, and single women, you end up with the following breakdown. Single women are by far the most loyal Democratic constituency, and we talked about that earlier. We have a neighbor who's a young man who's a Republican. I tease him that he can't date in Los Angeles during even numbered years because all the single women are Democrats, and he makes his way through it. Married men, all other things considered equal, are much more likely to vote Republican than any of these other four groups. Young men are single men, and for the single men in the room, I will tell you guys, I was a single man for a long time, so there's no insult intended here. Single men tend to vote in smaller numbers than those other three groups. Oh, we know you guys are smart. We just know you're preoccupied with other things. So if single women are over here, married men are over here, if single men are up there somewhere, that leaves married women. And if married women vote on issues that are most related to their gender, they tend to elect Democratic presidents. When they vote on issues that are more likely related to their marital status, and I realize there's some stereotyping going on here, but for the sake of simplicity, they're more likely to elect Republican presidents. So there are plenty of swing voters in the electorate. We talked about a couple of them. But historically, married women for decades now have been the most key determinant voter group in statewide national campaigns. So really interesting. And I mentioned earlier how in this election, young men who generally have voted in smaller numbers have become a key swing vote. That's because young men, single men voted in unusually high numbers in 2024. And now we're seeing more of a return to form. And the question is whether the Republicans can get them to turn out for congressional candidates the way they did for Trump. So plenty of other swing voter groups for us to talk about over the course of the midterm elections, but I'm glad you picked out on the most important one. And you can tell your mom that I said so.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mr. Lin Q, I saw your message a long time ago, so go ahead.
Hello, Professor Dan. It's so nice to meet you. I'm a counselor with Chinese Consulate General. I have two questions. The first one is, what are the tactics of Republicans for the midterm election? The second one is, will China be a topic for the midterm election? Thank you.
Okay. So first question, Republicans, and we touched on this a bit in the webinar, I think Republicans will do everything they can to highlight the importance of issues relating to immigration and issues relating to crime. Because as you heard me say earlier, most people in this country think elections are about getting voters to change their mind. No. Elections are actually about getting voters to believe that the issues on which they agree with you are the most important ones. Republicans aren't going to convince most swing voters to support them on healthcare or education or environmental policy, just like Democrats aren't going to get those voters to support them on issues of immigration or crime. So look for, as we talked about earlier, just as Trump did in the aftermath of the shooting of those two National Guards members in Washington last month, assume that he will continue to look for similar opportunities to highlight the importance of that issue. Will China be an important issue in this election? I think barring something unforeseen, and I understand that, as you know, the two leaders, with Xi and Trump, are scheduled to meet on numerous occasions this year. So it's hard to predict whether any one of those summits can make the issue more salient to American voters. But historically, Americans usually do not vote on foreign policy issues. In fact, the only time they do is when they judge the administration to have failed on an important issue. So Joe Biden on Afghanistan, George W. Bush on Iraq, those are issues, those are times when foreign policy rises to a higher level. I do believe in the long term that China will become the single most important issue in American politics. I don't think it will be by next November, but whether it's by 2028 or by 2030, whether it has to do with tariffs or Taiwan or TikTok or any number of issues, I see China emerging as the critical issue in the middle distance of the American political future. But barring something dramatically unforeseen at one of the summits next year, I don't think that will be the case next year. I don't think that will be the case next November. And I will offer you this. I have actually, outside of these webinars, met with representatives from any number of the consulates that are based here in Los Angeles. And if you'd ever like to have a follow-up conversation, please don't hesitate to contact the LA World Affairs Council, and they'll put us directly in touch, because I think both countries benefit from us talking and understanding each other is to the greatest degree possible.
Thank you so much. A very quick follow-up. How about patriotism? Because next year will be the 250th anniversary celebration for the US. Will Republicans, especially President Trump, combine the patriotism with MAGA agenda? Will that be a core campaigning tactics in my observation?
Boy, and Q, if you decide you would like it, you could have a future as an American political strategist. I think it's very likely that you will see Trump try to leverage our country's 250th anniversary for political purposes. I would be very surprised if he did not, for reasons that are more complicated than we can get into in tonight's discussion. At least in modern American history, Republicans have generally relied on more overt displays of patriotism than Democrats. I'm not suggesting for a moment that Democrats are any less patriotic than Republicans. I'm not suggesting that for a moment. Rather, that Republicans tend to employ patriotic concepts more readily as part of their messaging. And so I do believe that your instinct is absolutely correct on this one, that you will see the president and perhaps some of his party's candidates looking to tie the celebration of that anniversary into an election discussion. No question. I think that's very, very likely.
Thank you so much.
We have time for one more. Mr. James, you've had your hand up for a long time, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This may be a little bit inside baseball, but you talked, I think, earlier about the splintering of the parties, and it seems to me the Texas primary for the Senate may be as good an example of that as any. On the Republican side, you've got obviously Cornyn, who's a very traditional Republican, Paxton, who, apart from his legal problems, is an ardent Trump reporter, and so is Hunt, who's the third question. Now you've got Jasmine Crockett coming in, who's far left, and James Tallarico, who I think is a very attractive young Democrat. I understand that Texas for Democrats is like Moby Dick for Ahab. It's it is a white whale. Having said that, in your view as a political scientist, Dan, will the Texas primary expose or tend to paper over the divisions within the parties?
Oh, what a leading question, James, and it's a great one. I have no doubt that the Texas primaries, both Democrat and Republican, will expose those differences. It won't necessarily deepen them, it'll make them more clear. And I think in particular, Colin Allred's decision to drop out this week and run for the House of Representatives instead, and leaving Tallarico to run against a much more progressive candidate in Crockett, exacerbates not just the ideological split in the Democratic Party, but sort of the philosophical split between a candidate that reaches out to the political center in Tallarico and one who tends to rely more on motivating the base, the way Crockett will. And I do believe that we're already seeing the same thing in the three-way Republican primary. Wesley Hunt is, of course, the wild card there. But you have John Cornyn, who's almost a classic establishment Republican, running against Paxton, very much of a movement MAGA conservative. So as those primaries play out on both sides, there's no question you'll see those divides come into very full evidence. And Natalie, I'll tell you, if it's all right with you, we didn't start until 5 after. Maybe we can work in really quickly Randy and Melissa's question to wrap up.
Sounds good. Go ahead, Randy.
Okay. Hi. It's nice to see you and happy holidays.
You too.
This president, like many very powerful people or wealthy people, likes to operate completely just based on leverage. And it's in every part of the policies he's running everywhere, whether it's international, domestic, or looking at the oil in Venezuela. But what baffles me is just the abandonment of our allies. And I just wonder, is that going to last all through his 4 years? Or is there going to be something like some further awakening having to do with how much strain is being put on Europe to help defend Ukraine, that's going to change this type of outlook of just we don't care about our allies anymore?
Well, so Randy, I just got back from a trip to New Zealand where I did a series of speeches over the course of last week. And this is the question I was asked at every single stop over the course of the week. Not always put as politely as you just did, but certainly asked nonetheless. And what I've pointed out to them is that while Trump, of course, is a very singular personality, as we all know, when it comes to many public policy areas, particularly those relating to trade and tariffs and other areas of international relations, Donald Trump is as much of a symptom of American sentiment as he is a cause. In other words, I don't think Donald Trump formed this isolationist parade. I think he saw it forming and jumped out in front of it. Now, he's had these instincts for many years, long before he ever ran for office. He was talking about this back in the 1980s. But I'll give you what I consider to be a proof point. Back when I was full-time at USC, I had the privilege, first I was the founder and then later the director of the USC LA Times statewide political survey, which is now actually run out of UC Berkeley. And although we asked about candidates and horse races from time to time, we focused a lot more on public policy. And in 2014, a year before Donald Trump announced his campaign for president, we did a poll in which we asked Californians about issues relating to international trade. Did they think it was a net benefit or detriment to the state? And in 2014, not in northeastern Ohio, not in southern Michigan, but in the state of California, the self-proclaimed capital of the Pacific Rim, more people 11 and a half years ago thought that free international trade was a detriment to our state.
Really?
Not a benefit. And I have not I'm no longer associated with the poll, so I haven't had a chance to revisit those questions. But if you look at history, we know that for the last century plus, after every major military engagement, after World War I and World War II, after Korea and Vietnam, after both Iraq wars, our country turned protectionist and isolationist. After every economic downturn, from the Great Depression to the lesser recessions of the 50s and 70s and 90s to the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, after those economic crises passed, we turned protectionist and isolationist. So it shouldn't surprise us that in the aftermath of the Great Recession and the end of the longest war in our history in Afghanistan, that our country would turn inward. And it's worth remembering that in both 2016 and 2020, Donald Trump was only one of two presidential candidates who opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden did too. So I don't see Trump reversing this, but I think it's less about conviction than political necessity. Don't get me wrong, I think this reinforces his own instincts. But the political reality in our country right now is there's a lot more people who do want to turn inward, as was the case after the world wars, than want to see us more active on the global stage. And I would argue, to me, the single most important benefit of an organization like ours, not just my webinars, but all of our programs, all of our conferences, is to help the people we know, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, come to recognize the importance of that type of international engagement. And that transcends whether there's a Democrat or Republican in the Oval Office. So I think we might have lost Melissa.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Good. So you get to ask the last question then.
Okay. Okay. Dan, I'll hope it's short. So I know you don't like to predict who's going to win, but I wonder if you have a view on the length of time, maybe it's the full time of Hegseth or Rubio or RFK. Do you see any of them not lasting, a short period of time? Do you just have a view on any of that?
From what I understand, Rubio, who was originally viewed with some suspicion by Trump's most loyal supporters and advisors, is that Rubio really has been able to position himself very, very effectively with Trump. Trump trusts him. And so I suspect of the three, he's the one most likely to be in his current position as long as he wants to. Kennedy, I would be surprised to see him leave before the midterm elections, but I'd be surprised to see him last much longer beyond that. And that's not for policy reasons, but that's for political reasons. The Make America Healthy movement that Kennedy spearheads has, believe it or not, become a very vital part of the Trump coalition. And so I believe that Trump's political advisors, barring something unforeseen, will want to keep him on board at least through the midterms. And then beyond that, it's anyone's guess. Hegseth, to me, is the most vulnerable. It's not just the controversy over this second strike in Venezuela. It's worth noting that when the administration needed someone from the Defense Department to go to Ukraine, they sent General Dan Diamond, not Marco Rubio. Excuse me, not Pete Hegseth. When they've needed high-level defense presences in other international settings, they've sent undersecretaries and deputy secretaries, not Hegseth. The one thing right now that is protecting Hegseth that makes him safe is how much he's being attacked by Trump's opponents. And I think what Trump, even when he is turned on someone, never likes to give satisfaction to the opposition that they've forced an action on his part. So that's a very precarious place to be. I think of the three, he's the most vulnerable. But ironically enough, his greatest protection right now are his most virulent critics.
Thank you, Dan. Very, very helpful.
I'm guessing we will have enough to talk about throughout 2026, everybody. But in the meantime, I hope you all have an extremely happy holiday season. I think you may have noticed that thanks to Natalie, we've begun posting our sort of mid-month videos again. We posted one this month in which we talked about a few questions that we didn't get into in the November webinar. We'll do another one before the end of this year. But whether you happen to catch that or not, I'll be excited to see you again in the first week of January. Don't worry. You may have heard Krista. We won't do one on New Year's night. Don't worry, Roger, you can sleep in. But on Thursday, January 8th, we'll do our next webinar. And of course, our next Continuing the Conversation. And Jeff Baum and the other powers that be assure me that 2026 will be the year that we begin to augment these webinars with in-person discussions again. So hopefully I'll get the chance to meet some of you face to face. Thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us. And again, happy holidays and happy New Year.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
You will.
Awesome.